Hello, everybody. Today we are joined by Guy Turner from Hyde Venture Partners. I'm like super excited to see your face.
Thanks, Emily. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So I'm going to attempt to like introduce you and tell me if I get anything crazy. So
Okay.
you grew up in New York?
Close,
True.
Connecticut.
Connecticut.
Yeah.
Wrong already. Let's see how the rest goes. So you grew up in Connecticut. And then you went to Cornell for your undergrad. And then did which I loved, like, you did the 5 years of like technical mechanical engineering and then went and got your MBA.
Yep.
Did you get your MBA partially? Because I saw it was like 2008 and I was like, oh, I wonder if he went because of the whole like stock market, like down.
It's funny. The answer is no. I was not I was not so predictive, unfortunately. But once I knew I was going, I was desperately trying to get laid off because then you get a package.
Oh, yeah.
I was working for GE at the time, but they figured out that I was going to school anyways, and so I didn't get laid off and I had to quit.
Dang.
Yeah.
Because I was like, looked at that and I was like, oh man, he either planned so well or like this was just like happenstance. Like, but that's really cool. So you went to University of Illinois for your MBA. Is that right?
I went to University of Chicago. Yeah.
University of Chicago. Okay. University of Chicago. And then that's how you kind of started getting into investing. I guess maybe talk a little bit about how you got that into.
I wish to claim that there was some, intellectual path that brought me to the final right decision of going into venture, but really it was pretty serendipitous. I, was looking at different opportunities to pursue and I applied for an internship with a couple of venture funds that worked out. And then I ended up interning eventually for an angel fund called Hyde Park Angels. And that's where I met my original and still partner, Ira Weiss, and we decided to raise a fund together. And ultimately that's what we did. And endeavored to do that. I mean, really started working on it as I was graduating. I worked for a couple of years immediately after graduating at BCG because it takes time to raise a fund and do all that kind of stuff. And then left BCG once we had certainty of the fund.
Yeah, man. Boston Consulting, I feel like is just like so intense. Everyone I know who's worked there is just like, oh,
yeah,
tiring.
Well, it's an experience, but it was a good way. I mean, I didn't have any business exposure really until business school, and so it's a nice kind of consulting is a nice crash course in business.
Yeah, that is good. That's like a good balance too with the engineering and business experience. So for people who don't know, I feel like most of the people watching probably do know, but Hyde Park Venture Partners is a venture capital firm in Chicago, but does investing across the Midwest. And you guys are kind of associated with Hyde Park Angels, but not like formally connected.
We're really not anymore. We're sponsors of the group. We're friends with the folks who run it. They do a phenomenal job, but no, we're completely different entities now. Early on, there was a closer connection, but now it's completely separate.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And so I feel like one of the things that I wanted to, I'll get to that. Okay, so first, I guess give us a little background on Hyde Park Venture Partners and what you guys invest in and what you're looking for and sort of.
Yeah, I mean, so we really exist because 10 years ago, there were very, very few funds who invested in the Midwest. There were some funds who were based in the Midwest, but were really national investors. And there were only a couple of early stage, seed stage funds or early Series A with any focus on the Midwest. And that was a good opportunity for us to pursue and to help entrepreneurs get their first chunk of capital to grow their business. And we fundamentally think that seed stage and post seed and early Series A investing is a local business. And so that's what we do. We're focused on specific geographies and try to find companies early and work with companies early and ultimately help them grow enough to be able to then access what is more of a national capital market for late Series A, B, and C.
Okay. And what sectors mostly?
We do all types of software. So business to business, some business to consumer. We do tech-enabled services. Specific industry-wise, there's very few industries that we haven't invested in. So, we've done everything from logistics to fintech to ag tech. And because, again, our thesis is really geographic based, we don't limit ourselves too much beyond that in stage.
No. Okay. So one thing I feel like I really like about you guys and you specifically is I feel like you really are. So like a lot of people will be like, oh, we're Midwest investors. And it's like, no, like you're only hanging out in Chicago or you're only hanging out in Ohio or Michigan or whatever.
Yeah.
But I feel like you're super present. Like I feel like I know you pretty well. Like I see you at things regularly. Like you're like an integral part of the Michigan community. Like if you go to Ohio, people are like, oh yeah, I know him. Like how do you kind of authentically sort of build those connections and like, I mean, just a lot of travel, or is it like just kind of?
Well, once upon a time. I think it's a very important part of what we do. An important part of our strategy is being on the ground and building close relationships with people in the geographies where we invest, with entrepreneurs, with, micro seed funds, with people who run Techstars, you name it. That's our job. And we travel a bunch. I think the other kind of mini secret relative to other funds our size is that we have a relatively large investing team. We have a 6-person investing team, and that's pretty big for a fund that, we just raised a $100 million fund, but for a long time we were essentially a $65 million fund. And so,
you're
we
like,
invest. Well,
you're like,
we invest in having a team that's on the ground, and each one of us is in one of those, in normal times, one of those markets once a week. And, as I think a month ago, we did a session focused on Michigan. Tomorrow, we're doing a session focused on Indiana. Cool. That's our approach.
What are the kind of differences you see between the Midwest states?
Oh, that's such a good
question.
Is
like a totally random whatever question.
Yeah. So there is the mix of talent in each state is a little bit different. So, and it tends to have to do with the sort of institutions of record in those states. So Illinois is a pretty broad mix, in Chicago in particular. There's a lot of marketplace expertise because of Groupon and Grubhub. There's a lot of, I would say, go-to-market expertise and opportunities that pursue go-to-market because Chicago has been a hub for sales expertise for decades because it's in the center of the country. If you go to Michigan, there's a lot more sort of deep tech or deeper tech, really unique AI and things like that coming out of the university. When you go to Columbus and Cincinnati, Columbus, you see a lot of insurance stuff because Nationwide is there. In Cincinnati, you see a lot of brand stuff because Kroger and who else is there? Kroger and someone else. P&G, obviously.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was like, I know this.
Yeah, so the communities are small enough that the people who are pursuing tech opportunities and startup opportunities, essentially kind of reflect the DNA of the town and city and state that they're in.
Yeah, I also find that just with any of the research that we do, I feel like it is like, oh yes, after you kind of analyze the data, you're like, oh well, obviously, they're going to be super into this one sector or this one area of expertise because of this or that.
Exactly.
So we do the MBCA research report, as most people know, and we found that only 24% of venture capital professionals nationwide are minorities. Get ready for this question. Given that people's networks kind of tend to look like them,
Yeah.
And I think like institutionally, that's kind of how it's played out with the venture community, with the banking community. Like a lot of sources of capital, just kind of the network is very similar. So what do you think, in your opinion, would be a good step that the entrepreneurial ecosystem could take to start building a more inclusive community?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't claim to have all of I think there are some fairly obvious answers, but I can't claim to be at the leading edge because I think Hyde Park Venture Partners has a lot of work to do in this area. And we're currently focused on doing that. Look, I think it's funny. A lot of people say, well, this is a complicated topic. It's not that complicated. The answers are pretty obvious, which is that more minority entrepreneurs need to be funded and more minority investors need to be hired and more minority employees and executives and boards of director participants need to be hired into startups. So, I mean, that's not that complicated. It just needs to happen. And, one of the areas that we're looking at in particular, and again, we don't have a solution deployed yet, but hopefully we will relatively soon, is that underrepresented minorities have a major disadvantage because of the correlation with socioeconomic status. They have a major disadvantage in the friends and family round stage. And in fact, even just using the friends and family round kind of terminology is very presumptive. It basically assumes
you just have some rich family friends.
Yeah, it assumes that the entrepreneur comes from a family or has friends who have lots of money, and that's not the case for a lot of people. And so one of the things we've been looking at is how can that gap be filled by institutions or otherwise when it isn't or doesn't need to be by your average startup team, whatever they look like.
Yeah, that's a really good point to bring up, I think, because like that friends and family round, we found that same exact thing even with non-tech businesses. So we're working on a research report with the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation right now on small businesses in various sectors across just Washtenaw County, which is where Ann Arbor is located. And like that's what we found is like the main source of capital to start out, even for non-tech businesses, to go to friends and family or even people that have like used your business when you were small that are very familiar with you, and then say like, hey, like, can you help fund this first tranche of funding, which is a thing that only venture capitalists like, first amount of obtaining capital outside your business is just like getting that money from the people that are local to you. And so like it is like across pretty much all industries something where it's like a big issue in
I mean it's a great point. It's not just in venture, it's in any business startup community, right?
So that is kind of
that's one of the areas that we're looking at. And then the other area, so from a funding perspective, and by the way, I don't think there's a right answer. Like, I think there's a lot of different things that need to happen, and most organizations need to pick one or two and do them well.
Actually do it.
That will be our approach. The other one that we're looking very closely at is, when you think about where VCs have leverage, we have a major impact on formation of boards, and we have a major impact on sending people money, right? Like that's kind of our thing. That's what we do. To a certain extent, we have influence on, the construction of the C-suite, but still, it's very hard to be involved deeply in the hiring processes in C-suites for all our companies. So point is, I think we can apply pressure at the board level, both with respect to board constituency and hiring processes. But the hope is if a company embraces having a more diverse board, the C-suite follows that, and then ultimately the employee base.
Yeah, I could see that because I feel like the network issue is so serious in the venture community and in the tech community, of just like, if you have the board members that have a broader network, then you will find out about a greater pool of candidates, and like that does but yeah.
But in any case, I can't claim to be an expert, and nor do I necessarily come from the moral high ground here, because I think we as Hyde Park Venture Partners have a lot of work to do, but that's what we're thinking about.
Yeah, but I do think like that's exactly what people should be doing, is like, oh, like they don't know everything, and they recognize that they haven't necessarily done everything in the past, but then moving forward, it's like, okay, now we know, and now we're doing something about it. And I think that's worth a lot. To lighten the topic, I'm wearing my Hyde Park Venture Partners shirt.
Well done. We need to get the new version. That's the the branding's still the same, but we have a new shirt. So
good. I really like this shirt. I actually had to pull it out of the laundry for this conversation, because I was I wear it all the time, and then I was like, where is that shirt? And I was like, oh, it's in there. And I was like, so it's a little dirty and
well, so you'll be encouraged in our continued quest for equality. We now have a women's cut in our new version. So
perfect. I was just thinking that the other day, because I'm getting all these shirts that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a men's small, and I'm like, men should start having to order women's larges. But anyway, that'll be a battle for a different day. Okay, so changing topics. So how do you see the landscape shifting for Midwest startups for the remainder of 2020, or kind of the foreseeable future? So is there a specific sector you're most interested in watching in the coming months, or kind of how do you see it going?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I put a blog post out last week, or on Monday, I can't remember. No, last week, kind of drawing what appears to be the new opportunity curve as investors look at it, which is to say that the progress of most companies is going to be really stunted in 2020, and then there's a small group of companies whose progress has accelerated or remained the same in an accelerated fashion. And the honest truth is that venture capitalists are going to be mostly focused on that accelerated group, which is very small. And the data have already started to show that there's a massive flight to quality in Q1 and Q2, so bigger rounds for fewer companies. And I wish I could say we are. I wish I could say we can see the future and look at a company that had a bad 2020 and say, hey, this is still going to be the one, and we're going to fund it. But the reality is that I think most VCs will still be looking for those performance signals, and fewer companies have them. So what that means is that most companies need to figure out how to get by without venture capital. Venture capital is not for survival. It's for growth. And so in a time when you don't have growth, or growth is fundamentally off the table, either because demand is down or access to customers is down, or you name it, companies just need to be scrappy and bootstrap as much as possible, and not spend on growth that isn't going to be achieved. Because I think unlike, 2016 through 2019, growth at any cost is not the name of the game anymore. So that was kind of the nature of the blog that I wrote. And I think our behavior will mostly reflect that as well. Now, of course, we have been working with our existing portfolio really deeply to make sure that they have the runway. We're fortunate that probably 95% of our companies right now have runway through the middle of 2021.
Oh, that's good.
But of course, that's a big, there's a big assumption in there, which is that by the time 2021 rolls around, everything's fine again. And we'll see. So, the bottom line is it's a hunker down year for most startups, not all, but most. And it's a hunker down year for most VCs as well. There are rounds that are getting done, but there are fewer rounds that tend to be larger.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how the data pans out for the MBCA report when we're working on that in like January. But I mean, it's like one of those things that I think a lot of you want to like recognize like downtrends and uptrends because it kind of like helps inform future decisions. And like I think a lot of the report will be like, well, obviously worldwide pandemic is going on, but it's kind of a bummer, especially because it's like you're saying, companies, that's just kind of like you got to figure out what's going to work for you and then go forward in that direction and like just do it. But then it's like, how can you be like psychic? Because I mean, even us, like I feel like the first 2 weeks after, like it was like, oh, hey, did you hear about this thing called coronavirus? You're inside now and it's terrible and everything is going crazy. And I felt like, I mean, like Intracoin's like a 3-year-old company. Like we're just like, I'm just like trying to figure things out all the time. And so then it was just like, for probably 3 weeks, I looked crazy. Like I was like, what is happening? Why is my whole business going under? And was just like buzzing around. And then it was like kind of start figuring out those things that are working or not working and some things.
And, and it's interesting. So the data are seem to be showing that seed rounds are way down. I would say as investors, we are probably more favorable to funding seed stage companies right now because seed stage companies are not momentum bets. They are investments in teams and ideas that we think are really good, and they always require building. And when you can't sell is a great time to build. And so when we look at our investing activity at the end of the year, I would sort of expect that we will have done more seed investing than we might have in a kind of a nominal year for that reason. But leading kind of big rounds in companies that had their first year of 3x growth, there's just fewer of those opportunities out there.
Yeah, and hopefully software won't be affected too much because a lot of people I think are leaning on software right now or like upping their software game right now because they're like, well, we have to do everything remotely or what have you.
Yeah, certainly true in some cases. I think it's interesting when we sat down and did scenario analysis for how we thought the portfolio would evolve. I would say that the bottom came shallower and faster for our SaaS companies than we thought it might. Now, again, we still don't know what the rest of the year in 2021 are going to be like, but at least so far, our companies have been able to retain revenue. Our SaaS companies have been able to retain revenue better and to a certain extent grow revenue better than we thought was possible. So that's encouraging. That doesn't mean they're going to have by sort of common standards an amazing 2020, but a lot of them will have years that are not, they didn't go backwards and didn't burn a lot of capital.
Yeah. So how do you, this is like a random question, but so for people that are watching that are not that familiar with venture capital firms, so venture capital firms raise money from limited partners, and then all of the money goes to the venture capital fund, and then that fund is deployed or is given to or is invested in different portfolio companies. So when you're kind of looking at the companies that you guys have invested in and you're like doing this ranking, how do you then what are you communicating back up to the limited partners about? Like, do you kind of rate them and then kind of periodically go back and rate how they're doing during this kind of crazy time? And then, or how does that all?
Yeah, we're pretty transparent with our investors, or we certainly strive to be. So our normal cadence, I can lay it out tactically. Our normal cadence for reporting to investors, we do a quarterly report every quarter. And then historically, we've done a big annual meeting once a year. And then sometimes, not always, but sometimes another investor call halfway through, I guess, on the other half of the year. But other than that, it's mostly, funding announcements, sort of email types of communications of here's what happened, blah, 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 or that kind of thing. We've been much more proactive. So when COVID first hit, I think for a period of about 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, we're sending an update to our investors by email. Pretty tactical update on what we were seeing. I wouldn't say on a company by company basis.
Yeah.
But we would do that every 2 weeks or so. And then we held an investor call in May, and we're doing another one next week. And then we have our virtual annual meeting in September. So the cadence has really picked up. And, our approach with our investors is the same that we want our companies to take with us, which is that, bad news travels fast, and, be transparent so there's no surprises. And that's really the foundation for a productive relationship. And, I think so far our investors have appreciated it, and we've appreciated the same from our companies.
Yeah. It does seem like you guys have like a really good reputation for being like approachable from both the company side, and I don't know your investors, but I would imagine that probably is similar.
We try.
I feel like if the entrepreneurs like you, then probably everyone likes you.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Hope so.
Okay, a couple more, just because we're almost out of time. So what is? Oh, I like this question. Okay. So what's one place in the Midwest that you're like, man, this place is really going to heat up in the next few years?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I like a prediction question.
I mean, I feel like you want me to say Michigan.
No, I do not. There's no one place.
Yeah.
Like, don't say Detroit or whatever if you don't like, but I like.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I think I don't know if it's acceleration or if it's our own sort of opening our own minds to it, but we've been active in Toronto for 3 or 4 years now.
That's so interesting.
And you sort of, I mean, I would say that that there are so many layers there that we could just keep going in terms of opportunity. Great talent, smart people. I think that's true everywhere, but it's a really large pool. The city is similar size to Chicago, I think, and I think that's been a great place for us and will continue to be. But that said, we historically have, outside of Chicago in the Midwest, have been investing kind of like every other year in each of the other markets, and I don't see that abating.
Yeah, that's really interesting you say that about Toronto, because I feel like I keep hearing like little things like that.
Yeah.
And Toronto's such a cool city. And don't they have like an entrepreneur visa in Canada where like if you just are starting a business, they view that as like something that they really want, and they make the path to like being able to stay in the country much easier, where like that's something that the United States I think does not have.
Yeah, I don't specifically know about that, but I do know they've been on the receiving end of our immigration antics.
Yeah.
So they have gotten a lot of people moving there from U.S. universities or from outside North America who would otherwise have come to the U.S. but for unfortunate policies.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Maybe entry point Toronto.
There you go.
Yeah, I like that. The Toronto office.
It's a great place.
Yeah, I love it. We went there a few years ago before any of the kids were born, and it was like the best. Like we went for like a long weekend, and it was like such a great time.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
yeah,
I like that. Well, thanks for reminding me of Toronto. I like that. Okay, and then what's the first place you'd like to travel when all the restrictions are lifted and everything is safe? Don't say Toronto again.
No, honestly, it'll be. I mean, I'll be pretty excited to get on the ground in one of the geographies that I spend a lot of time in for investing. So that's Michigan and Minneapolis. I don't know that there's a preferential order, so I'll leave it at that.
Where do you go in Minneapolis mostly?
I mean, we have three, or I think we had 3. Now we have 2 investments active downtown. And so downtown.
Nice.
Yeah, all around.
I like it. Okay, cool. Well, I will let you go about your day, but it was so
Thanks
good to
for
see you, and I
time.
love catching up with you always, and hopefully I'll be able to see you in person soon.
Yes,
That would
someday,
be great.
someday.
Yeah. Okay. I will
Thank
talk to you
you.
later.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.